The night the compass found him, Jonah was already halfway to forgetting he had a life at all. He moved through his town like someone treading water, enough to keep afloat, not enough to swim anywhere interesting. His days were predictable: school, odd jobs, the small quiet that filled his rental room while the rest of the world made noise. He liked the quiet because it let him think without an audience, because it let him count his small comforts without having to explain them. But quiet can also be a slow hunger. It leaves you waiting for something to arrive that will give edges back to a life that feels too smooth. It arrived in a box at the thrift store where Jonah worked just to pay the electricity bill. The box was unlabeled and heavy with the kind of things that used to be someone's important pieces: a tarnished pocket watch, a small brass key, a bundle of letters tied with fraying twine, and the compass. Nothing about the compass seemed special at first glance. Its brass had the soft green of age. The glass was slightly clouded. The needle rested in a way that suggested sleep more than direction. He turned it over in his hand and felt oddly a pulse, like a heartbeat in metal. Where did this come from? Jonah asked the owner of the shop, an old man named Elias who had more stories than customers. Elias shrugged and pointed to a back alley. "Left on the doorstep 3 nights ago," he said. No name. If it doesn't find a buyer, I'll keep it as a curiosity." "You like curiosities, Jonah. Take a look." Jonah felt something prickle in his throat, an old, foolish hope, the way a single warm breeze will make a cold night seem possible. He slipped the compass into his pocket after his shift and walked home under street lamps that buzzed like tired insects. The compass was quiet until he passed an intersection where the light pooled on cracked pavement. Then the needle moved. It didn't swing toward north. It didn't point to any of the orderly directions Jonah had learned in maps and schoolbooks. Instead, it tilted subtly toward the east alleyway, then farther to the old river path. Then finally at a sharp angle toward a house Jonah recognized but had no reason to remember in detail, the house at the corner where his mother used to work as a cleaner a long time ago. He tightened his grip on the metal and told himself he was being silly. Compasses didn't know anything about people. They were instruments, simple and honest. Yet the pulse in his pocket felt warmer now, like something waiting. For 3 nights after that, the compass guided him to small things: an umbrella left at a bus stop, a lost wallet returned to a student, a necklace dropped by a woman who had been too hurried to notice. Each time John took the small direction it gave, something small unlatched, someone smiled, a thank you was given, a door opened to warmth. Jonah told himself he had happened upon coincidences, but he couldn't dismiss the tug at the back of his chest that felt like a map finally being read. On the 4th night, the needle pointed home literally to the narrow corridor where Jonah's family lived. There was a house he had rarely entered since moving out, a place that once smelled of lemon soap and laundry day, that now held more boxes than faces and the shadow of a past that refused to be neat. He hadn't gone back in months. He had reasons, pride dressed thin, old resentments folded tight. But the compass wouldn't stop. It pulled him past the stoop, into the hallway where his mother still kept photographs in frames that never quite seemed to smile correctly at him. The house was quiet in that way old houses are full, of the small sounds of a life that can go on without spectators. The compass tugged him through rooms until it paused over a drawer in his mother's bedroom. His hands trembled as he opened it and found a bundle of letters tied with faded string. On top was a short note in his mother's handwriting: "Keep if anything of ours comes back to claim us." He turned each envelope over, lips moving as if reading something that belonged to a different life. The last letter he opened wasn't to his mother at all. It was addressed to him, in a hand he hadn't seen in years. Jonah, if you ever wonder why the world feels heavy, remember the reason isn't always yours to carry alone. His breath hitched. The compass in his pocket felt hot now, like a coal pressing at his ribs. He sat on the edge of his mother's bed and the letters fell around him like small leaves, each with a line that could remap an entire day. The compass had pointed him home to a truth, one that tasted like forgiveness and old regret combined. He folded the last letter against his chest until the edges lined up. The next morning, Jonah found himself awake before sunrise, the same restless energy humming through his limbs. He had choices. He could fold the letter away until the next time something nudged him toward a past he mostly ignored. Or he could follow the compass's pull deeper. He chose the pull. There was a weight to choosing to look, kind of terrifying in its honesty, but the metal in his pocket seemed to approve with a warm buzz. The compass led him to places that evening where the town kept its secrets tucked, an abandoned pier where fishermen kept nets in winter, A laundromat where an old man who hummed in numbers kept his own small world of order, a churchyard with headstones that looked like open palms. Each stop revealed a person with a story that fit into his like a missing tile, a man who kept a small wooden boat because it reminded him of his father. A woman who cleaned the city's stairs at dawn because a childhood promise held her steady. A teenage girl saving money for a camera to prove she existed. Jonah listened. He returned wallets, knitted scarves, a photograph, a ring lost in a storm last year. Each time he did, the world opened a little wider, like a jar lid easing off. On the 8th night 3 weeks since the compass first found him, it pointed somewhere Jonah would not have expected. The edge of the old cemetery, to a grave that had his family name carved into the stone. He had walked past that place 1,000 times and never noticed the small brass plaque behind an ivy leaf. Tonight he saw it. He knelt and brushed dust away with the back of his hand. The compass's needle spun and stopped, true as the sun. He read the name and the dates. It was someone he recognized, an uncle who had left the town and never returned. A man Jonah had met once before he was old enough to hold the memory clearly. The wind moved like a voice across the field. The compass shuddered again, then pointed toward the woods behind the graveyard. Jonah followed the way a person follows direction when the pull is internal and the steps feel less like movement and more like purpose. Between the trees he found a path he had never noticed, a narrow trail covered in moss, lit here and there with old lanterns that still had a faint glow. At the end of the path stood a small cottage Jonah knew only from the stories his mother once told on slow afternoons. The place his uncle had left for years ago, a place whispered of when adults needed to teach lessons without using the word loss. The cottage door was closed, and a scent of cinnamon and rain hung in the air like waiting. He knocked. A woman opened the door, older than any picture had prepared him for, but with a smile that belonged to someone who'd kept the secret for too long. "You followed it," she said simply. "It always knows the shape of what needs to be found." "Knows what?" Jonah asked. His voice sounded small. "The truth," she said. "The compass isn't a tool for finding north. It finds the thing that has been looking for you." Jonah stepped inside. Her cottage was filled with oddities maps with places circled he had never heard of. Jars of things labeled in handwriting he could not place. Photographs of faces that blurred into one another like pages from a single life. In the middle of the room stood an old man in a sweater that had seen too many winters. He looked directly at Jonah like someone locating the last piece of a puzzle. "I am your uncle," he said, though the face took a moment to become familiar. He spoke about the days he left, the reasons he could not stay, the shame that had collected layer by layer until it made him afraid of return. He had left to save something, he said, and in saving it he had broken the rhythm of the family. As he spoke, the compass on Jonah's palm hummed in a way Jonah felt in his bones. And then, like all stories that plan a twist, the truth bent. The compass, the uncle explained, hadn't always pointed outward. It was made to point inward. It showed people not just where they needed to go in the world, but where a truth was waiting inside their family or themselves. It was given to those whose lives had been braided with small losses that never got named. It called to the one who could carry the truth forward and make it light again. Jonah realized the compass had selected him because he had listened. He had been the one who turned small misplacements into returns, who fixed what others left loose. He had the patient hands to take a story and sew it back into place. For a moment the cottage felt like a place outside time. The old man reached for the compass and touched it lightly. "Not everyone is chosen for the same reason," he said. "Sometimes it's because they're brave. Sometimes it's because they are kind. Sometimes it's because they're stubborn enough to care." Jonah stared at the faces on the shelves, photographs of people who had left and returned and left again. He felt a strange, fierce tenderness for them all. The uncle spoke of mistakes he'd made, of a business that failed and an argument that grew into silence. He spoke of what he had kept hidden, letters never delivered, apologies swallowed, birthdays missed. The compass had led Jonah here to fold those lost threads back into a family that had simply tangled itself into silence. When he left the cottage, it was almost dawn. The needle of the compass stood still now, pointing to a horizon Jonah hadn't noticed before, not a place on a map but a beginning. He walked home with the weight of the evening settling in his chest like an ember. He felt less alone because the burden of knowing had changed shape, shared, named, addressed. The next days were not perfect. Old hurt did not dissolve like sugar. There were uncomfortable dinners and strange silences and letters that needed careful handling. But there were also small returns, a cousin who called after years of silence, a neighbor who reminded Jonah of a childhood memory he had almost lost, a mother who let a story slip that made him laugh and cry at once. And then 1 week later, the twist arrived like a weather change. Jonah was standing in the kitchen, peeling a potato with a kind of contemplative focus when his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered, expecting a wrong number or a caller looking for directions. A voice said simply, "Jonah? It's me." He knew the voice the way a person knows the creak of their own door. It was his uncle, real, impossibly close. "I'm coming back," the voice said. "If that's okay." Jonah felt a jolt that wasn't relief exactly, but a deep, echoing correctness. He felt ready and unsettled at the same time, like someone who had practiced for a play and now found themselves center stage when the curtain finally opened. But the twist wasn't the reunion. The twist came a week after the family dinner, when Jonah found another letter in his pocket, one he hadn't seen before. It wasn't from the uncle, not a thank you or an apology. It was from the compass maker, an old artisan who had died years ago, whose hands had shaped brass into instruments that looked like maps for the soul. The letter said simply, "The compass chooses who looks, but sometimes the compass itself needs looking at. When you have given what it asked of you, return it to the places you found it so someone else can be found." The moral arrived in the quiet that followed his understanding. The compass had been a gift and a test. It had taught Jonah that direction isn't only about finding what is lost in the world, it's also about revealing what is lost inside us. You can chase a life of small comforts and steady quiet, or you can let yourself be called to heal the small, nameless wounds in the places you come from. Jonah had chosen the harder path, to look, to listen, to take on another's story until it was no longer a burden. And that choice changed more than one life. Before he returned the compass to the thrift store, the place where the metal had first sung in his hands, Jonah sat on the stoop beneath the street lamps and considered his life. He thought about small kindnesses that had grown like roots, ways people quietly anchor one another without knowing. He understood then how listening could be a kind of bravery, not the kind that makes noise, but the kind that steadies a table so someone else can hold their cup without spilling. He tucked the compass back into the box where he had found it, the brass warm with use rather than newness, and left a small note. Taken, used, returned. For the next one who listens. If this story settles anywhere in you, if it sits quiet like a small stone, tell me in the comments which secret you think the compass would find in your life. Would it point to a forgotten apology, a small kindness you never gave, or a truth you keep hidden? Like the video if this moved you, and subscribe if you want more stories that bend toward the strange and the kind. We put a new tale here every day, short, magical, and carrying a lesson. Don't miss the next one. Because the truth the compass taught Jonah is one the world forgets too often. Direction can be a responsibility. It can be an obligation to look where others will not. To return what was lost, not because you owe, but because you can. In that responsibility there is purpose, and in that purpose there is a kind of light that does not fade when the night comes back. So he returned the compass. He returned it to the place where curiosity and necessity meet. And when the next person found it, perhaps they were ready, perhaps they were not. But the world needs listeners, and the brass will always find them in time. If you like this, join FableGlow for more. Subscribe, ring the bell, and let your heart be found by stories that teach small, true things. And remember, when something calls you, when a tiny compass in your pocket seems to thrum, you might already know the way home.